It's that time of year when we make New Year's resolutions and think about what the future may bring. But it's also a time for reflection, and what a decade it's been. 10 years ago, September the 11th was just another date on the calendar, and there was no such thing as Facebook. Since then, the world has changed remarkably, with a global war on terror, a preoccupation with social networking, and climate change recognised as one of the century's biggest challenges. So what can we expect in the decade to come? Richard Slaughter is an internationally recognised futurist and the author of a new book, The Biggest Wake-Up Call in History, and I spoke to him late today in our Brisbane studio. Richard Slaughter, looking back at the past decade, which trends or changes did you pick and which did you not anticipate at all?
Well, I have to be honest with you, Tracy, and say that I'm not really in the business of picking winners and losers. Looking ahead is a complicated task, and the future is a very problematic subject. But there are a couple of things that really surprise me. One is the incredible spread of social networks and their tremendous penetration into populations around the world. Clearly that sparks something that really turns people on. So that was one of the big surprises. But another one has been the strength of the opposition to getting real about global warming. That really has been a strange surprise, because given the nature of the risks involved, it would seem to me really strange that people wouldn't get the facts and understand them and realise that we had some major adjustments to get started on. And that seems to have taken a lot longer and still be taking a lot longer than one would have thought.
What do you think is perhaps the major issue in the years ahead?
To me, the central issue that we're facing is how to move from a trajectory of economic growth and the impacts that go with that growth to something more approaching a steady state way of operating on the Earth. Clearly, at the moment, we have exceeded some global limits. We've seen that with carbon and some other things. We look set to exceed some others by mid-century. Others are not so easy to measure. We're looking at the acidification of the oceans. There are a lot of signals from the global system that are telling us that we have to try to find new ways of reducing human impacts on the planet generally. That doesn't mean an end in economic growth completely, because there's lots of ways of doing things that are virtually impact-free, particularly on the internet. But as a driving force in society and culture, I think the notion of growth, we have to really get to grips with that and understand that its day is basically over and we have to find new ways of doing things.
In terms of the global economic crisis, Australia has survived thus far relatively unscathed. Do you think that that sort of trend will continue for Australia's economy? Do you think it will stay strong?
I would tend to think that Australia is in as good a position, if not better, than any country in the world. I mean, I just read this morning, for example, in the paper that Queensland receives something like $10 million a day just from the export of coal. If you imagine all the other things that are going out of the country on a daily basis, of course, not right now with the floods being so serious, but on a normal basis, then Australia still has tremendous incomes from resource exports. And I imagine will do so, and it's got lots of other things going for it as well. On the other hand, I think that we are kidding ourselves if we can imagine that a fossil-fueled economy can continue very much longer. Clearly, we're living now in the time when the supply of oil cannot be much expanded. The demand for it continues to go through the roof. And we're going to have to find new ways of weaning ourselves off of this what's been an amazing energy source, but which is no longer infinite. So that will also have a big effect on what we do and what other countries try to do.
Terrorism was a big global issue, certainly in the last 10 years or so. Do you think that will continue to be one of the big issues?
I think the real issue is, how do we get on with each other? How do we understand the different value systems that exist in different cultures and the whole variety of positions that can be legitimately held within those? I think we just have to get better at incorporating others, other cultures, other values, other ways of seeing things and doing things into our everyday modus operandi. Were we to do that better, I suspect that the things that are driving terrorism, which is resentment and poverty, lack of opportunity and so forth, it would just wither away. So I actually think that terrorism is terrible where and when it happens, but is actually something that we can deal with if we go about it in the right way, in these long-term constructive ways.
Certainly in your book you paint a grim picture about a number of issues in the future. Is that the way you approach the future, with caution?
With caution, but I truly believe that if you really think you understand a difficult situation, then that's the beginning for dealing with it. And so it seems to me to be really helpful to get really clear what are the threats that face us. So that's why part one of the book deals with what are these issues, and look at them one by one, get our heads around them. And for me at least, the more I've come to understand what's really at stake, particularly with global warming and peak oil, as I've already mentioned, then instead of ending up with a kind of gloom and doom outlook, which I think is actually quite a lazy way of thinking about it. It's challenging, but the more we get our heads around the detail, the more we get our heads around what the options are, and believe me, many people are working on that, the more we work into that area, what we find is that a whole series of options opens up things that we can do individually, collectively, as a world, that can actually take us through this undoubtedly challenging period.
So if you had to give your top 3 things that we need to be proactive about to make the world a better place, what would they be?
Top 3. I guess I would like to see the advertising industry dignified, in a dignified retreat. I believe that we've been subject to a kind of psychic assault over the last several decades, telling us things that actually aren't very helpful, that we need to buy more, consume more, that our identity is tied up with what we have instead of who we are. And I think that's just been a huge misdirection. We actually need to shift to not what can I have, but what can I be. That's just a much more productive area. Secondly, as I've said, we need to shift off the growth path. We need to understand that growth made a complete sense over centuries when humanity was getting started and getting established, learning how to live on this planet. We've now reached the point where we have to rein that growth in, or at least make it less destructive. And the third thing I guess I'd like to see would be a shift in worldview. There's the self-centered worldview, the egocentric worldview, there's the socially centered worldview, but we actually need to move to a global worldview, an earth-centered worldview. And with that shift comes the ability to see everything we do on a daily basis, driving our car, earning a living, fixing the roof, deciding what appliances to buy, where to go, how to travel, into that global context, because the global context is in fact the actual environment that we live in. And now we've got the tools, the methods, we've got tremendous ability to analyze complex data and come up with clear conclusions. And with all that in our hand, I reckon that we can do a much better job of steering away from the dystopian overshoot and collapse futures towards futures that are sustainable and also humanly more desirable.
Well, there's some food for thought there, and possibly some New Year's resolutions as well. So thank you very much for speaking to us, Richard Slaughter.
You're very welcome.
And that's the program for tonight. Enjoy your weekend, and from all of us here at the 7:30 Report, best wishes for a safe and happy New Year. Good night.